Following the First War of the Diadochi, where the alliance headed by Antipater, Craterus and Ptolemy had fought against Perdiccas and those loyal to him, a new settlement had been reached at Triparadisus. Notably, Antipater was to become regent, and Antigonus Monopthalmus was appointed to campaign against Eumenes and the remainder of the pro-perdiccan faction. As the various parties departed from Triparadisus, it was time to make the settlement a reality. G'day and welcome back to the Research Project History, and in this episode we're taking a look at the aftermath of the First War of the Diadochi and the petition of Triparadisus, with Antigonus's campaigns against Eumenes and the other allies of Perdiccas. But before we jump into it, please like and subscribe as it really helps the channel out. Cheers. Having lost their command to Perdiccas, and with the legitimacy that comes with the Regency, as well as being condemned to death by the rest of the army, Eumenes and those associated with him, in late 320, looked to build their legitimacy as well as the loyalty of their army. Eumenes further sought the support of Cleopatra, Alexander's sister, who Perdiccas, the former regent, had planned on marrying. Despite being friendly to him, she rejected Eumenes, not wanting to take any blame for starting a new war between the generals, and asked him to leave Sardis in Central Asia Minor. Without the open support of a member of the Argead dynasty, Eumenes needed more than ever to have the loyalty and support of his troops, and while royal blood was unavailable, gold was. So he took his soldiers on a raiding party of the region, looting those who did not acknowledge his authority, and thereby paid his men. The efforts of Eumenes to buy the loyalty of his men worked, at least in the short term. Letters were found in Eumenes' camp from the opposing alliance, offering 100 talents to any man who killed Eumenes. The response from his soldiers was to appoint a 1,000-man continual bodyguard to prevent this from being a possibility. Once again, Eumenes richly rewarded his men for their loyalty. This is in stark contrast to what was happening in the camp of Antipater, who was still having issues with paying his men, and had barely survived a riot about it in Triparadisus, and another revolt on their way home to Macedon. It was around this time that Eumenes helped himself to as many horses from the royal herd at Mount Ita as he wanted, greatly enhancing his cavalry, although he also sent a receipt to the overseers of the royal treasury to give a cloak of legitimacy to his actions. Having this cavalry advantage in the short term, Eumenes tried to provoke a battle with Antipater and Antigonus, who were in the region, by conducting raids near Sardis and then in western Phrygia and near the Hellespont. Antipater and Antigonus, however, were at this stage unwilling to commit to a battle, having several mutinous murmurings going on in their camps. With Eumenes only having an advantage on the open plains, where the cavalry was more used than the infantry, the two generals and the royal army were able to avoid direct conflict. Antigonus and Antipater were not completely unwilling to engage with the Perdiccan faction. They dispatched Asander to invade Pisidia and attack Attalus and Alcatas, although he was unsuccessful, and returned to Antipater and Antigonus before continuing on to his newly acquired satrapy in Caria. With winter setting in, Eumenes wintered at Kyllene. Meanwhile, Antipater and Antigonus met to sort out differences between themselves. Antigonus would remain in his position in Asia, with the commission to wipe out the remaining Perdiccan loyalists, while the two kings who had been in Antigonus's care would go with Antipater back to Macedon. There was also a transfer of soldiers between the two camps, allowing for around 8,500 veterans to return home, something they had been angling for since they were in India 5 years earlier. This move significantly improved the composition of Antigonus's force, as he no longer had to deal with a large number of aged, tired and increasingly mutinous soldiers, and instead they were replaced by Macedonians who had only been in Antipater's army for a short time, and had only been away from home for a matter of months. He was now in a good position to fulfill his commission. Over the winter, Eumenes' position worsened. He had sent messengers to Alcatas in Pisidia, hoping to have a combined force of all the Perdiccan faction. This would have created a significant force for Antigonus to deal with. While it is unknown how large the army would have been, Arrian reports that Attalus by himself had 800 cavalry and 10,000 infantry, and the group in Pisidia consisted of Alcatas, Attalus, Documus and Polmon. Alcatas, Polmon and Documus met with Eumenes. However, none were able to agree as to who should take overall command, and so the group from Pisidia abandoned Eumenes and returned to Pisidia. Taking the soldiers appointed to him from their winter quarters, Antigonus in the spring of 319 marched against Eumenes, who was in Cappadocia. The arrival of Antigonus in Asia sparked a certain amount of panic among those associated with Eumenes. One of his generals, a man called Perdiccas, deserted Eumenes with 3,000 infantry and 500 cavalry. It should be noted that this is not the Perdiccas, the Regent, who had been assassinated in Egypt during the First War of the Diadochi. It is safe to say that the Macedonians didn't mind sharing their names with others. In response to this desertion, Eumenes sent Phoenix of Tenedos with 4,000 infantry and 1,000 cavalry. In a surprise nighttime attack, Phoenix and his men captured Perdiccas and took control of the troops. While killing the leaders of the desertion, Eumenes treated with kindness the soldiers in order to win back their favour. While on his way to confront Eumenes, who was encamped on an open plain in Cappadocia, which would give his cavalry the best advantage, Antigonus sent messengers to Apollonides, leader of Eumenes' cavalry, and with a significant amount of bribery, convinced him to desert Eumenes once the battle started. Diodorus records the battle this way. Thereafter, Antigonus sent messengers to a certain Apollonides, who commanded the cavalry in the army of Eumenes, and by great promises secretly persuaded him to become a traitor and to desert during the battle. While Eumenes was encamped on a plain in Cappadocia, well suited for cavalry fighting, Antigonus fell upon him with all his men and took the foothills that commanded the plain. Antigonus at that time had more than 10,000 foot soldiers, half of whom were Macedonians, admirable for their hardihood, 2,000 mounted troops, and 30 elephants, while Eumenes commanded not less than 20,000 infantry and 5,000 cavalry. But when the battle became hot, and Apollonides with his cavalry unexpectedly deserted his own side, Antigonus won the day, and slew about 8,000 of the enemy. He also became master of the entire supply train, so that Eumenes' soldiers were both dismayed by defeat and despondent at their loss of supplies. Despite the defeat and the loss of the bulk of his cavalry, Eumenes managed to escape with a portion of his infantry, with most going over to Antigonus. But rather than seek safety immediately, he sought retribution on Apollonides and a proper burial for the fallen. Plutarch writing, "For, to begin with, he was defeated by Antigonus at Orcini, in Cappadocia through treachery, and yet, though in flight, he did not suffer the traitor to make his escape out of the rout of the enemy, but seized and hanged him. Then, taking the opposite route in his flight to that of his pursuers, he changed his course before they knew it, and passing along by them, came to the place where the battle had been fought. Here he encamped, collected the bodies of the dead, and burned them on pyres made from the doors of the neighbouring villages, which he had split into billets. He burned the bodies of the officers on one pyre, those of the common soldiers on another, heaped great mounds of earth over the ashes, and departed, so that even Antigonus, when he came up later, admired his boldness and constancy. Finally making his escape proper, Eumenes and what was left of his army went towards Armenia. Eumenes was in a difficult position. His army was, as Plutarch puts it, a body of men too small to give battle and too large to escape the enemy's notice. And his army just kept getting smaller, as deserters left to join Antigonus's much more powerful army, who were harassing their movement with a superior cavalry, although no pitched battles occurred. Rather than letting his army slowly disintegrate, Eumenes played a bold move. Dismissing most of what was left of his army, and retaining only 600 to 700 soldiers, comprising mainly of cavalry and around 200 infantry. With these he escaped into the fortress of Nora in the Taurus Mountains. The fortress was small, but suited Eumenes' needs perfectly. Diodorus describing it as follows. This fortress was very small, with a circuit of no more than 2 stades, a stades being roughly 180 metres or 600 feet, making the fortress about the same size as the inside area of a 400-metre running track, but of wonderful strength, for its buildings had been constructed close together on the top of a lofty crag, and it had been marvellously fortified, partly by nature, partly by the work of men's hands. Furthermore, it contained a stock of grain, firewood and salt, ample to supply for many years all the needs of those who took refuge there. By occupying it with a relatively small force, Eumenes could ensure that the supplies would hold out for an extended siege. Arriving at Nora in the late spring of 319, Antigonus began constructing a series of double walls, ditches and palisades, well and truly trapping Eumenes, as much as he was keeping them out. With the situation unlikely to be resolved through force in the short term, the two generals began negotiations. With Antigonus's nephew hostage inside the city, Eumenes exited and met with Antigonus as old friends. Antigonus offered that Eumenes could join forces with him as a subordinate. Eumenes refused, and with confidence that his current situation did not warrant, stated he wanted all charges against him dropped, and that he should have his old satrapy and other possessions returned to him. Antigonus was not in a position to confirm these changes, and referred the matter to Antipater, with Eumenes also sending envoys to negotiate terms of surrender with Antipater. Negotiations stalling out, Eumenes returned to the fort, while Antigonus placed a sufficient guard around the city to maintain the siege, and departed to confront the other Perdiccan faction in Pisidia. Eumenes would remain an effective prisoner in Nora until the Second War of the Diadochi. Antigonus, leaving Nora with nearly the entirety of his army, some 40,000 infantry, 7,000 cavalry, as well as war elephants, went to face off with Alcetas, Attalus, and their allies. Alcetas was the brother of the former Regent Perdiccas, while Attalus had been married to the sister of Perdiccas and Alcetas, who was executed in Egypt following the assassination of Perdiccas. Antigonus's force dwarfed that of the opposition, who had mustered 16,000 infantry and 900 cavalry. However, it was still a big enough number to cause trouble in the struggle for power. Diodorus writes that Antigonus and his army made the march to Craterus, a city somewhere in the region of Pisidia, in just 7 days, a journey of 2,500 stadies, or 450 kilometres, 280 miles, in just 7 days. This forced march took the Perdiccan camp by surprise, as they did not expect them to appear in the region so quickly. Diodorus retells the battle as follows. As soon as Alcetas learned that the enemy was at hand, he drew up his phalanx at top speed, and with a mounted force attacked the troops that were holding the ridge, trying with all his might to get the best of them by force and hurl them from the hill. A stubborn battle was waged, and many fell on both sides. Then Antigonus led 6,000 horsemen in a violent charge against the phalanx of the enemy, in order to cut Alcetas' line of retreat to it. When this manoeuvre had been successfully completed, the forces on the ridge, who were far superior in number, and also had an advantage from the difficulty of the terrain, routed the attackers. Alcetas, whose retreat to the infantry had been cut off, and who was caught in a trap by the superior numbers of the enemy, faced imminent destruction. Therefore, now that survival itself was difficult, he abandoned many of his men, and hardly escaped the phalanx of the footmen. Antigonus, however, led his elephants and his whole army down from a higher position, and struck panic into his opponents, who were far inferior to him in number, for they were in all 16,000 foot and 900 horse, while Antigonus, in addition to the elephants, had more than 40,000 foot soldiers and about 7,000 horsemen. The elephants were now attacking the army of Alcetas from the front, and at the same time the horsemen, because of their superior number, were pouring about them on all sides, while a force of infantry, which far outnumbered them and also surpassed them in valour, was holding a position above them. At this, tumult and panic began to grip Alcetas' soldiers, and because of the great rapidity and force of the attack, he was unable to draw up the phalanx properly. The rout was complete. Attalus, Documus, Polmon, and many of the more important officers were taken captive. But Alcetas, accompanied by his own guards and attendants, escaped with his Pisidian allies to a city of Pisidia called Temessus. Antigonus obtained the surrender of all the rest by negotiation, and enrolled them in his own ranks. By his kind treatment of them, he brought no small addition to his forces. Alcetas had curried favour with the Pisidians, and it paid off for him now, as they accepted him into their city. When Antigonus demanded they hand him over, the young men of the city refused, while the old men preferred to concede to the request. However, help was only available for a short time. To get around the position of the younger, the old men convinced Antigonus to draw the young men out of the city by skirmishing with them near the city and then retreating. While they were busy doing that, the old men would take care of Alcetas. Antigonus agreed, and the plan was put into effect. Alcetas, recognising that the jig was up, ended his own life. Returning to Craterus, Antigonus met with a messenger who carried the news that Antipater, the regent, had died in Macedon, and Polyperchon had replaced him. Just as one situation had settled, there was to be another reshuffling in the play for power. It would be the Second War of the Diadochi. But that's for next time. Thanks once again for joining me for this episode, and if you can, like, comment, subscribe. I'm told it helps the algorithm, but we'll see you then. Thanks for watching.